Welcome to another AP US History video with Mr. Pate. Today we're looking at the Roaring Twenties. We're having two essential questions that we will answer. How and why did women change in the 1920s? And what caused the economic boom of the 1920s? Well, our first question is answered by topic number one, the new woman. The woman of the late 1800s and very early 1900s. This is a woman who is involved in, she is very modest, she dressed in a Victorian manner. Even though women had been involved in settlement houses and reform movements and the Second Great Awakening, the social gospel, and the WCTU, women still were seen as primarily being in a domestic sphere. And then the progressive era comes along and women get involved. And women get the right to vote. Women are involved in World War I. They're in the labor force. With all of these things happening, women explode. They shatter that Victorian image. And what they're going to do, the new woman is going to be represented by this iconic image of the flapper. But in general, a flapper was just maybe a little bit more extreme than what a lot of women were, especially among the young women in cities. And that's an important point to remember. You have this divide between urban in the cities, rural, small town, and country areas. Okay? Yeah, it's more conservative in the rural and country areas, the small town. The big city is going to be a lot more change. Well, women in those cities are going to cut their hair shorter, wear makeup, independently go out on the town, be more sexually active sometimes, drink and smoke, hang out with men in clubs. These are things women never ever did. Back in the Victorian era, a kiss was like almost a promise of marriage. It was like an engagement almost. Well, women are going to be different during this time. Women are going to be continuing to pursue more jobs, and there's kind of more of a rejection of that domestic sphere role for women. So that's the new woman. Okay, the Republican presidents of the 1920s. The Republican presidents of the 1920s. Well, you have Warren G. Harding, who does not do much. You have Calvin Coolidge, and then you have Herbert Hoover. They all featured Republican Congresses. This is a Republican-dominant decade, and all three of them, until the stock market crash, are going to be focused on having policies that favor tax cuts, that are laissez-faire. So business taxes are dropping, individual income taxes are dropping, and the Republican presidents of the 20s, they're all pro-business. Calvin Coolidge didn't say much. He's pretty much a very quiet guy, but he did say the business of the American people is business, and the man who works at a factory, that's his temple, basically. So he really believed that the business of Americans was to be making money and doing well in business. The Republican presidents all are laissez-faire. This is an era where regulation does not do well. It's not a very pro-union. It's kind of an anti-union decade. But big business is going to thrive under the Republican presidents in the 1920s. Kind of the architect of some of their economic policies, a guy who worked for all three of them, is Andrew Mellon, the Secretary of the Treasury. And Mellon is going to advocate trickle-down economics, where businesses and the rich would get larger tax cuts. And he reasoned they pay more, but they're going to get larger tax cuts that are going to essentially, he says it's going to give businesses more money back to hire people, and it's going to give the rich more money to spend. Now, what we will see is the rich having more money to spend. At some point, the rich don't spend it, and you'll see on the video on the causes of the Great Depression, this multiplier effect. When the poor get money, they spend all of it. Okay? And you could say, well, there are good and bad aspects of that, but that money then goes to someone else, who then they spend some of it, and it goes to someone else, and it goes to someone else. So the money gets used several times. If you give someone who's rich a tax break and they just save all the money, is that good? I mean, it's good for them, but there's no multiplier effect going on there. You can look at that both ways, of course. I mean, there are some important aspects that we've kind of lost in recent years of the importance of saving money, but I digress a little bit. All right, so Andrew Mellon is going to be tax cuts. Teapot Dome scandal. Not a lot of significant things to report before the stock crash under Herbert Hoover of things that happened during his presidencies, but Warren Harding, a lot like U.S. Grant, had several people who came in who were his buddies and allies who were very corrupt. The first cabinet secretary to ever be sentenced to prison is going to be under Harding. The Teapot Dome scandal is going to be the illegal giving of oil lands that were set aside for the Navy in Teapot Dome, Wyoming. Albert Fall, the Secretary of the Interior, overseeing those lands, he got bribe money and then just looked the other way while companies siphoned off a bunch of this oil that was sitting there for the Navy's use. This is the Teapot Dome scandal. And Harding is going to die in office. Some people speculate he became very depressed because he dies kind of oddly and suddenly. But they're going to say he dies depressed basically because he's finding out about all these scandals. Alright, that's the Teapot Dome scandal. Consumerism and advertising. Consumerism and advertising. Well, what's going on at this time, consumerism and advertising. You have the CPI during World War I, you've already seen a video on, Henry Creel's committee, and it's going to perfect propaganda techniques. And so what you're going to see is advertising becomes very sexual and very predatory in nature. If you look at 1920s ads, women are dressed more scantily. They make it look like if men buy certain things that it'll appeal to women or vice versa. And the flip side of that is that you will not be desirable if you don't get this product. Much more so than previous ads were before the 20s. Also, you're going to see a lot of ads that are trying to make you feel like you'll feel good if you buy the thing and you'll feel bad if you don't. So it's very manipulative in some ways, but they had perfected that craft during World War I. Consumerism. You have a lot of new products available, a lot of household goods, refrigerators and toasters. You have cars become more affordable with the Model T. You have the radio, vacuum cleaners. So there's a lot of different things out there as consumer products. And people catch a fever to have the latest things. Having a car was like a statement that you were middle class. But having these household products was a status symbol unto itself. And these are things that people wanted to have in their homes. One other thing you can say along with that is the installment plan, which I don't have up here, but credit was so easy. Not only do people want these things, but the whole thought process of we are going to not buy this until we can afford it. That mentality goes out the window in the 20s, and you have now people spending money they've not earned yet. Alright, industrial perfection. Taylorism. Okay? Taylor's ideas that you could perfect and continue to improve the efficiency of the workplace, of factories. It kind of hits its zenith, at least for the time, in the 20s, with Henry Ford continuing to tinker with and perfect his assembly line and other efficiency-saving mechanisms, machines, processes that are used by people and of utilizing machines. Industrial process gets more efficient, which does allow prices to drop. So this consumerism is fueled by advertising and the desire. It's fueled by easy credit with installment plans, exciting new products, and they're getting cheaper. And Model T is the best example of this. It's the first affordable car. Alright, the radio. The radio is another, of course, one of these consumer devices, but it is going to be the first entertainment device. People would sit around and listen to radio programs as a family, like they might watch a TV show today or a movie. And the radio had news, it had music, and it had entertainment shows. And it was tremendously popular, and every person wanted to have a radio. It's going to become very critical during the Great Depression and World War II with the fireside chats. They have radios with Roosevelt's addresses there. Okay, entertainment and leisure time. People start to work a 5-day work week. They start to have a day or sometimes 2 days of leisure if they're only on 5 work days. And there are new entertainment things. There are motion pictures. Silent films turn into talkies by the end of the 1920s, where they have sound. Leisure time activities. You have amusement parks. You have circuses. You have professional sports show up on the scene, especially baseball, but football and boxing were also popular to a lesser extent. You could also say even like tennis and golf had a following. And that leads us really to the heroes of the 1920s. You're going to have, I think, pop culture icons. I can't think of a time they existed before the 20s. But you're going to have music artists. You're going to have professional athletes, Babe Ruth, Jack Dempsey, Red Grange. Okay? You're going to have actors, Al Jolson and the jazz singer, and Charlie Chaplin, and all kinds of other people. These people become kind of heroes that are idolized by society. And so in all of these ways, the 20s is a time where the stock market is blowing up in a good way. You have a roaring economy that's doing super well, big changes for women breaking out of previous roles, people really raising the standard of living and the quality of life in a lot of ways, although sometimes going into debt to do it, and then all kinds of new opportunities. This concept of leisure time and this idea of even a teenager, these things did not exist before the 1920s, with child labor gone, and this idea of like a shorter work week with finite amount of hours contributing to leisure time. You start to see modern America taking shape. But that's all the time we have for today. Stay classy.